Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you my Aunt Debbie's biscuits. Gluten-free, of course. Some of you might know Our Heritage Works, his YouTube channel. We did a collaboration over Easter. And now he has decided to do a special thing for Memorial Day weekend. And that is an allergen conversion recipe. It's a really neat idea, I think, and it's for Memorial Day. And it's a way to celebrate loved ones that are no longer here with us and make a recipe that was theirs. And of course, convert it to be allergen-free for whatever your food or dietary needs are. Mine, as you all know, is gluten-free, and I also make things sugar-free. And the recipe that I chose is, as I mentioned, my Aunt Debbie's biscuits. Or I should say one of her versions of biscuits. She had quite a few recipes that she always made, and this is one of them. And she's not here with us anymore, but what a wonderful way to celebrate her memory. And this recipe, when I first went gluten-free a long time ago, I actually tried to make these biscuits, and they turned out terrible. And it was pretty soon after I had gone gluten-free, and I really didn't know what I was doing yet. And I was struggling with many different bread recipes. This was one of them. And I gave up on bread or bread things for quite a long time. It was frustrating. If you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I thought, what a perfect opportunity to revisit these biscuits, because I have learned and come a long way with my gluten-free baking. And as you can see, not very many ingredients at all. These are just a basic, kind of a drop biscuit, baking powder biscuit. I'm going to show you that it can be done in a muffin pan and on a cookie sheet as well. If you don't want to put them on a cookie sheet, you could use 2 muffin pans. It's usually about 14 to 16 biscuits. But both ways work really well. And so I've greased my muffin pan with some bacon grease. And then my cookie sheet, I just have some parchment paper on there. Of course, you could grease a cookie sheet as well, but it's really versatile to do either. And I've got my oven preheating to 425, and I've got all of my ingredients ready at room temperature. And like with other biscuit recipes, we are going to start with our fat and then cut it into the flour. And the original recipe, which I actually will put in the description box, I'll put her recipe and then I'll put my converted recipe. You'll see the difference if you compare the recipes side by side, but of course I'll explain it as I go along as well. But the original recipe called for shortening, or I imagine at some point it might have been lard. Today I'm using a combination of butter and bacon grease. And it's a total of a half a cup. So I've got a 1/4 cup of butter cut up. And it's room temperature. I've mentioned before, if you're using a pastry cutter for making a pie crust or something like that, that if your butter is ice cold out of the fridge, it's really hard to use a pastry blender. So I've got it at room temperature, not really soft, but softer than straight out of the fridge. And then of course, a 1/4 cup of my bacon grease here. And the bacon grease is a little bit softer than the butter, and of course shortening would be as well. Before we get on with that, I'm going to mix in my dry ingredients. Right here I've got 4 cups of my gluten-free flour. I have 2 tablespoons of baking powder. And then I have 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of baking soda, all in there. And then I'm just going to lightly mix this together. You don't even have to do this. The reason I chose to use my Aunt Debbie's recipe today is because she was a really big part in my growing up. And I learned a lot from her about cooking. And this is a recipe of hers that I saw her make more times than I can count. And I put that over there, but I need it over here. And I think so many of us have recipes passed down from loved ones that we all still make. Or it might have been a recipe that was lost and that person never wrote it down, and now everyone has to maybe guess and try to figure out how to make that recipe. So fortunately for me, her recipe is here. And of course, my version will be gluten-free, as I mentioned, but I'm also going to add an egg. Her original recipe does not have an egg, but because I don't use a binder in my flour, the egg will be the binder. So they will be a little bit different, but of course, it's my version of her biscuits. So with my butter and my bacon grease, I'm just going to dump all of my flour in at once. And then just start cutting in our butter and bacon grease. I don't have a knife. I've mentioned before when I use my pastry blender, I always have a knife. It really makes it easy to help get any butter that's in here stuck, to get it out of here. And this is a lot more flour than you might be used to cutting in compared to something like a pie crust or something like that. So it might feel like it will never cut all the way in, but just stick with it. And if you don't have a pastry blender, you can just rub it between your fingers. And then I give it a stir periodically just to see what's happening. See how things are coming along. Give it another stir. And this is looking really good. It looks almost like breadcrumbs, but there are some, about pea-sized pieces of dough in here. And this is what we want it to look like. And this biscuit recipe, it's a little bit on the sweeter side. You could use these biscuits to make biscuits and gravy, something like that, which I have done before, years ago, before I went gluten-free. But it is a sweeter biscuit. And so I actually prefer my other biscuits for biscuits and gravy. And these ones I really like with some butter and jam, or just some butter and honey, something like that. But that's just me. Get all these bits that didn't make it in the bowl. And this is 1 1/3 cups of water. And then I have a 1/3 cup of honey and 1 egg. This would be about 3/4 of a cup of sugar that you would mix into your dry ingredients at this point. But because I'm using honey and an egg, I'm actually going to combine all of them in with the water. That way I just have to pour in once and just stir everything together. Don't get any shell in with your egg. Egg goes in. So not only did I learn to make biscuits from my aunt, I also learned how to take care of a chicken. You know, when they butcher a chicken out in the yard and they bring it in, defeathered, and most of the innards taken out, I got to learn how to take care of the rest of it. I also learned how to remove feathers that were stuck with a pair of pliers. And that was my first experience participating in cooking an entire chicken and seeing it from the entire process. And it might sound a little on the gruesome side, but when you learn where your food comes from, I think it's a really good lesson. And you learn all of the steps from watching your chicken run around in the yard, all of the steps that it gets to be dinner that night on the table. And that's also the first time that I tried a chicken liver and a chicken heart and the gizzard. And while I don't appreciate eating those particular parts of the chicken now, it was an interesting lesson. And I did taste them, and they weren't terrible. But nowadays, you don't really get the insides of the chickens unless you live on a farm or something like that, which my aunt did. Which is also another reason I wanted to highlight her for this Memorial Day weekend, is because I learned so much from her. And throughout my life, I've been compared to her. We are both short, is the first thing. Very similar in personality. Very similar mannerisms and traits, which I think is a wonderful thing to inherit from a family member. But also, one of the best compliments I ever received, my oven is ready. One of the best compliments I've ever gotten was in relation to my aunt. My uncle, which was her brother, he had come to stay for the weekend at my house. And the whole weekend he kept saying, "This is just like being at Debbie's house. You're cooking the whole time. You're making everything. You're in the kitchen. We're all in the kitchen." So to me, to get a compliment that was comparable to her and her food and all of the wonderful things that she made in her kitchen, it's one of the best compliments I've gotten. So I'm just making a little bit of a well into my dry ingredients, or flour and butter and bacon grease. And then I'm just going to pour in my egg, water, and honey mixture all in one. And I always find it so helpful to use a wooden spoon when you're mixing a batter like this. And if you've ever made a biscuit dough like this, where it's kind of a shaggy looking dough, that's exactly what we want it to look like. And with a lot of recipes like this, a lot of times they tell you not to over mix it, not to do that. But with gluten-free, we don't really have to worry about that. Part of the concern with over mixing is developing the gluten. We don't have to worry about that. So move everything aside. I'm going to start with my muffin pan first, and we're going to go about 3/4 full. I was hoping this spoon would work, but I think it's going to be a little bit too big. I'm going to put it on a towel so it doesn't rattle around. And I'm just eyeballing it to be about 3/4 of the way full. I think that one has too much. And then before I move on to my cookie sheet, I'm just going to double check that all of these are about the same size. And that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to move this aside and bring over my cookie sheet. And you'll notice you can get a scoop of your dough and then just lightly press it together. We're not kneading it or anything like that. We're just loosely forming it kind of on the spatula here and then plopping it on our cookie sheet. And with these ones on the cookie sheet, you could actually make them a little bit bigger if you want to. And I'm going to do the same thing with these ones. Just make sure they're all about the same size. And you can see how fast these biscuits really come together. And you might think that biscuits take a long time, but something like this where you don't even have to roll them out or pat them out and cut them out. Just a super fast drop biscuit. So those look pretty good. I'm going to wash up real quick. So these will go in the oven. I'm going to check them about 15 minutes and see what we've got. These ones may or may not cook a little bit faster, but we'll see. They look really good. That was about 15 minutes in the oven. Even though they're getting a little dark on top, I don't think they're quite done in the middle yet. And then the cookie sheet, they're not quite done yet either. We don't want these to burn. But maybe just another 2 minutes or so. And we'll see. They look like my Aunt Debbie's biscuits. They're a little raggedy on top, which is what they always look like. I'm so excited to have these. I haven't had these in years and years and years. They look really good. These ones are, of course, a little bit darker than these ones. But because these ones are a little bit flatter, and they cooked on the different rack in my oven. I don't know if your oven is like that, where one rack cooks at a different rate than the other one. But for these ones, I'm going to use a spatula. They smell really good. Woo. Don't burn yourself on your cookie sheet. Move that out of the way and then bring these ones closer. And I've got a fork just to lightly loosen the sides. I don't want these to sit in the pan too long and get soggy. Be careful not to gouge out the side of your biscuit with your fork. They smell so good, and they look really good. Nice and golden brown. Even these ones that are a lighter color on top, they really are golden brown on the bottom. In less than a half hour, you can have this many biscuits for breakfast, dinner, whatever. They come together so fast. You want these to cool off, or of course, I mean, you can eat these right now, and they're nice and warm. From what I remember, they do fall apart a little bit if you eat them fresh out of the muffin pan. But these have been cooling for a few minutes. Let's see what they both look like on the inside. And you can see, you can make them as big as you want. You know, of course, the ones that were on the cookie sheet. And then the muffin pan, it really gets golden brown all the way around. And then, of course, this one on the cookie sheet, nice and golden brown. Looks just like a biscuit. Before we taste it, let's break this one open. And this one looks just like a biscuit too. Let's give it a bite. So good. Because these are kind of a drop biscuit, they're not super light and flaky like a traditional biscuit, but really good. Such a fast, quick bread, which is why they're called quick breads. But I will say, and again, maybe my judgment and my memory is a little cloudy because it's been so long, they are a little bit heavier than my aunt's biscuits. Of course, they are gluten-free. And I will say, for being a gluten-free biscuit, they really are good. And that egg in there, I think, helps lighten up the denseness that gluten-free baked goods can be. And they're not as sweet as I remember either. And of course, I've cut the sugar quantity in half and I've used honey, but really so good. My favorite way to eat these is with some butter and jam, butter and honey, something like that. But you could totally make these for a biscuits and gravy as well. And even regular biscuits come together really fast, but this is faster. I'm going to call this an amazing success of converting my aunt's recipe into a gluten-free, sugar-free biscuit recipe. I almost feel sorry for myself that I've waited so long to make them. But now I can make them all the time. And what a wonderful way to celebrate people that are no longer with us. And I don't know about your family, but we do that a lot in my family. Even people that have passed on many, many years ago, around their birthdays, we make their favorite cake or pie or something like that. And it's a wonderful way, through food, to celebrate our loved ones. I want to say thank you to Our Heritage Works for thinking about this wonderful way to celebrate this Memorial Day. Let me know if this is something that you do for Memorial Day. Growing up as kids, we always used to be thrown in the car with all of the flowers from the yard, and we would go to all of the cemeteries. Those were wonderful memories too. But head on over to Our Heritage Works. I'll put a link to his channel in my description box and see what recipe he has made for his Memorial Day allergen conversion recipe. And it's for anybody. Maybe you want to submit your recipe. He is sharing what other people are making. If you decide to make a recipe from somebody that you wanted to honor, go ahead and let us know. Maybe you have a similar family recipe that you've been wanting to try. Maybe you've been missing this kind of a biscuit recipe. Let me know. Let me know what you think. I'm so excited to have these biscuits again. I don't know why I waited so long to make them, but here they are now. I can't say how many will be left by tomorrow, but thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.